Hey guys, in today's response, we will be looking at a video from Daily Dose of Wisdom, where host Brandon McGuire interviews Frank Turek, and in the title claims that Frank Turek explains how objective morality proves God. And I will be explaining how the video falls very short of the claim in the title. Enjoy the video and let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Morality is ingrained in us through evolution. It's essentially Sam Harris's argument when he debated William Lane Craig. Human flourishing. That's what is moral. We all know that we want it. But I mean, I have my own thoughts about this, but how would you respond to that idea? Why do we need God in order for there to be objective morality? Or how does the fact that there is a more objective morality point us to God? But first, is there objective morality? All these questions are, integrated into each other.
Let's start. Is there objective morality?
Sure.
I think we know that by intuition.
Okay.
In fact, Jay Budziszewski at UT Austin wrote a book 20 years ago called What We Can't Not Know. And he basically says this: when you're old enough to know what murder is and what wrong is, you know that murder is wrong. It's not innate knowledge. You weren't born knowing it, but your mind is structured in such a way based on the fact it's made in the image of God, that when you're old enough, if your mind is functioning properly, you know murder's wrong. Now, you could be talked out of that by bad education or by propaganda, that kind of thing. But properly functioning mind, appropriate age, murder's wrong.
This is not true. Personally, I think that murder is wrong, but there are people who are adults and sane who don't think that murder is wrong, or at least don't think that it's always wrong. And I mean, hell, I don't even think it's always wrong. If a police officer needs to shoot a criminal in order to prevent that criminal from harming an innocent person or harming the officer themselves, or, any other person defending themselves, or, an innocent person from someone trying to harm them, that is still technically murder. And I think it's justified. Maybe your intuition tells you murder is wrong, but my intuition isn't why I think murder is wrong. I have actual reasons outside of it just intuitively seeming wrong. The only time I think it is justified is if it is the last resort in self-defense or to defend an innocent victim who will otherwise be killed or seriously injured, because I don't want myself, my family, or quite frankly anyone to be murdered. How can I intuitively think it's wrong if I just found a way to justify it in certain dire circumstances? Now, a Christian might ask, well, if God isn't real, why do you even care what happens? Nothing matters if God isn't real. And to that I would say, actually things do matter if God isn't real. Maybe things like people dying don't matter to the universe or some transcendent being, but as someone who enjoys being alive and has empathy for others, we'll talk more about empathy later, it does matter to me personally. Let's say tomorrow we found out for sure God isn't real. Would you really just stop caring about your family because there is no longer some great universe-creating being that also cares about it? No, you would still care because you personally care about your family no matter what. And that would never change based on the existence or non-existence of some supernatural entity. And as someone who doesn't believe in God, I especially don't want people to be murdered, because I think if you get murdered, that is it. I don't think there is a heaven. I think that because someone else's actions, you would just be done with life. If God is real and a good Christian soul gets murdered, wouldn't they just go to heaven? If that is the case, then why does it even matter if they get murdered? They're going to a better place anyways, if that is in fact the case. So, if anything, murder matters even more from an atheist perspective because the consequences are much more dire without the existence of heaven. Going back to your specific argument, how could you possibly use the intuition of every single person on earth as evidence for objective morality? You can't comment on anyone else's intuition other than your own. You're not in anyone else's head other than your own. And given that your actions of not murdering people are different than the actions of the millions of people throughout history who have killed people, how could you possibly use everyone's intuition as evidence when their actions don't reflect your claim and you can't look into their heads to confirm what you're saying anyways? There are plenty of killers that exist in the world who aren't insane, who are adults, who try to justify their actions, and who don't feel bad about what they did because of whatever the justification that they come up with. Let's look at the revolutions throughout history. People used killing in an attempt to further their political objectives, whether that was overthrowing the current power or if it was the current power killing to maintain their power. They killed for their political beliefs or desire for power. Do you think all of them thought what they were doing was wrong? No, they were doing what they felt was necessary to reach their goals. If they all intuitively knew it was wrong, it wouldn't have happened. There are people in organized crime who do it because they think that they're protecting themselves, their family, their colleagues, income, etc. Do you think that they think it's wrong? Even if you think that all of those people who have killed while carrying out crimes intuitively know what they did was wrong, you can't prove that. And according to what some of them say, which is as close as you can get to inside their head, they make it clear they don't all think their killing is wrong. According to many of the interviews I read, many of these people involved in crime justify their actions because they were born into poor situations, or it was all they could do to survive, or because of their loyalty to their organizations, etc. They don't think what they did was wrong, so how could you say that everyone intuitively knows it's wrong? It's not just career criminals either. There are otherwise normal people who have killed because they think that they're protecting their family, whether they feel threatened by direct violence or something else, and therefore they think that what they did was right. There are deeply religious people who think that they're killing in the name of God in today's world and going back hundreds to thousands of years. The most obvious example is the Crusades, and one that would give your claim a particularly hard time accounting for the intuitions of others is the Crusade against the Cathars, also known as the Albigensian Crusade, where the papacy waged war against a pacifist Christian sect in southern France, who obviously had no army, and the papacy did this simply because they deemed the Cathars heretical. They killed thousands of innocent citizens who had no hope of fighting back against the organized Crusader army. The Crusaders and papacy weren't threatened in any way, and they resorted to cold-blooded genocide over differences in theology. You did mention that people can be talked out of their intuitive objective morality by bad education or propaganda. But if there are people who wish to spread that bad education and propaganda, and people willing to believe and follow it, then how can you say morality is objective? That as a species it is intuitive to all of us who are old enough and have a functioning brain. If there are so many different people with different perspectives on morality, how could you use the consistent intuition of everyone on earth as evidence for objective morality from God when people's morality is anything but consistent and homogeneous? Just because your intuition says it's wrong doesn't mean that everyone else says that too. Do you think that Pope Innocent III, ironic name by the way, who was the one that called the Albigensian Crusade, had an intuition telling him that murder is always wrong? Or perhaps his intuition was telling him to commit genocide because he thought these Cathars weren't practicing the faith correctly. Why would God, who creates objective morality, allow his regent on earth to commit such an atrocity in his name and against fellow Christians who were pacifists, no less? This is so opposed to his no-killing morality. Maybe it's because he doesn't exist and different people have wildly different notions about what is and isn't right and wrong, because they have different life experiences and there is no such thing as objective morality. This is just a theory, but it makes a lot more sense than your theory that everyone intuitively knows murder is bad when there are so many examples of people murdering people thinking they're in the right, despite this supposed objective morality. And sometimes even in the name of that God that you're talking about. How do you reconcile the ideal that people want to spread bad education and propaganda to get others to abandon their so-called objective morality if it exists in everyone in the first place? How do you reconcile the fact that bad education and propaganda works on some people if everyone knows that what the bad education and propaganda is telling them goes against the objective morality that God bestowed upon them? God is supposed to be an all-powerful being who bestowed this objective morality on people. How could so many people possibly resist their all-powerful creator? Does this mean God isn't actually all-powerful? Or does it mean that objective morality isn't real? Or is it just people have free will to do what they want, but they actually know it's wrong? And if they say they think it isn't wrong, they're just lying. Because of course, Frank Turek can read everyone's mind and know that they're lying if they say they think something is right, even if it goes against God's objective morality. Now, this whole time we've been talking about murder. But that is just one of the most extreme examples. Murder, along with, of course, rape, is always brought up in this argument because saying murder is bad is something most normal people can get behind because there are a lot of reasons outside of God says murder is bad to think that murder is bad. That's why it's useful to trick people who aren't critical thinkers. But it's not like there aren't far more up for debate and controversial things that go against God's objective morality. For example, premarital sex. If we are supposed to intuitively know murder is bad because the knowledge of objective morality comes to us directly from God because of the way He created our brains, then why do I have no intuitions or even reasons to think that premarital sex is inherently bad in any way? Granted, that doesn't mean that I think there aren't bad things that can happen from certain promiscuous behaviors, like sleeping with random people you don't know, but all I'm talking about is simply sex before marriage. For example, boyfriend and girlfriend who really love each other, but it's too early to know if they should actually get married. Why is it bad for them to have sex? If anything, in my opinion, it's probably better that they do before marriage to know if they're even compatible like that. Imagine waiting for marriage to have sex, and then you find out that the two of you don't even really work that well that way. How is that beneficial? Nothing in my intuition tells me waiting till marriage is better than not waiting. Or homosexuality, for example. Sure, it's not my thing, but nothing in my intuition is telling me that is inherently wrong and I need to stop others from doing it. In fact, the worst thing about being gay probably isn't even anything directly related to it. I would imagine the worst part about it is dealing with people who feel the need to stop it because of their God. So you might be able to trick some people with the murder one, but there's a reason that you don't argue that we all intuitively know premarital sex and homosexuality is bad. It's because it would be even more clear how terrible your argument really is.
Now, why would it be wrong if there was no God? It would be just your opinion. And if there's no purpose to life, as atheists say, then you can't say here's the right way to live life and the wrong way to live life. Sometimes I give this illustration, particularly on a college campus. I'll say, how do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's when he throws it to the other team and they take it back for a touchdown. And people initially don't get it. You know, they say, well, the rules. No, it's not just the rules. The only way you know a touchdown's better than an interception is you know the purpose of the game. And you know that a touchdown takes you closer to the purpose and a pick six takes you further away. If there was no purpose to the game, you couldn't make any judgment to say this is a good play, the touchdown, and this is a bad play, the pick six. If there, likewise, if there is no purpose to life, you can't say that, say, loving somebody is the right way to live and murdering them is the wrong way to live, because there's no objective to life. Without purpose, you can't determine good or bad, right or wrong. Even from a pragmatic perspective, you can't determine that. So there's got to be a purpose, and atheists admit there's no purpose to life.
To begin, yes, it is just my opinion that murder is wrong. It is also the opinion of most other people, although not everyone, and there are a lot of reasons many people, including myself, have this opinion. For example, we don't want to be murdered. We don't want our family and friends to be murdered, and most people have empathy for others that they don't know and don't want those people to be murdered either. If you get murdered, you probably have a horrible experience leading up to it, and even if you don't, and it happens in an instant, you don't get to continue living your life. Most people want their life to continue so they can keep spending time with those they love, taking care of their family and doing things that they enjoy. And most people don't want to take that away from others either, because most people feel empathy for others. These reasons apply with or without a God. I don't believe a God exists, but I still want to keep living because I enjoy it, and I want others to have that opportunity to live their lives too because I have empathy. Why does that have to come from God? I would anticipate that a response from a Christian might be, well, why do you have empathy? Or why do you care about being with your family? Or why do you like things? Well, there are a lot of ways to answer that question, but at the most basic level, when you break it all down, after I do and experience things I like, or spend time with my family, or do something to help someone I care about, my brain releases chemicals that make me feel good. I could give more specific reasons that I like those things, but it all comes back to the brain chemicals at the most basic level that affect how you actually feel. And different people get them from different things. I want to keep doing and experiencing things, and I want the people I care about not to get murdered because I want them to be able to keep doing and experiencing things as well and doing things with me. I don't see why these desires that people have need to come from a God. If we look at evolution, it would make sense for a species that desires to continue living and experiencing things and wants other members of their species to do that as well, and has tools like intelligence to fulfill those desires to be so successful. Not only do you want yourself and others to keep thriving, but most of the people around you want that for you too, resulting in teamwork. And that teamwork makes it more likely that all of you survive and pass on your genes. And it is the reason why children are able to survive until adulthood. I can't say this is how it happened for sure, but given what we know about the world thus far, it makes a lot more sense to me than, well, God created us and he wanted it to be that way. Unless, of course, God can be proven to exist. If he can be proven, then I suppose God did it would make the most sense. But until we know he actually exists, it certainly doesn't make the most sense, at least not from my perspective. And even if you could prove objective morality exists, which you have done a very poor job of thus far, that wouldn't prove God exists, and it certainly wouldn't prove that specifically the Christian God exists. It would simply prove that objective morality exists. Even if you could prove that, you would still have to find out why, not just jump to the conclusion that it comes from the specific God that you worship. Moving on. There is no objective purpose to life. Some people don't feel like their lives have purpose. Others feel like their lives have the purpose of taking care of their family. Some think that their purpose in life is to perform a certain activity or task. Some feel like they have multiple purposes to fulfill in life. So there isn't some objective purpose that every person is trying to fill. And people who have found purpose in life usually don't just intuitively know their purpose as if it came from a God. Most people have to do and experience things to discover what they think their purpose is. Just because I don't think that there is an objective purpose in life handed down by God doesn't mean I can't say certain ways to live are wrong and certain ways are right. To be clear, if I say certain ways to live are right, that doesn't mean I think they're objectively right in the context of the whole universe. It means I think that X way to live is a good way to live because of my personal values. Not that it is a definitively right way by the rules carved into the universe. I don't think that there are any rules carved into the universe to decide right and wrong ways to live. And there are people with different values from me who may disagree with me about what ways to live are right and wrong. And their opinions on that are just as valid as what I think, because all of these opinions are subjective. This doesn't mean I think every way to live is okay and should be tolerated by everyone else. It means I don't think that there is any greater standard deciding what is and isn't right beyond individual people. In your football example, there is objective good and bad things because the game was created by people for the purpose of competition. If it is up to individuals to decide the purpose of the game during the game, or whether a touchdown is good or bad during the course of the game, then you wouldn't really be able to compete and decide who wins or loses. And no one would play it because you wouldn't really be competing in any objective way. It wouldn't make any sense. The world and life is not a game, and as far as we know, wasn't intentionally created at all and has no objective purpose. You may try to say, well, people do compete in life, and that's true, but there are no objective measures of success or getting closer to the purpose because there is no objective purpose. Sure, some people are pursuing the same purposes as others and feel like they might be competing with other specific individuals, but not everyone. And one person's subjective success, like making a lot of money or helping a lot of people, might not matter at all to someone else. Just because someone feels like they're succeeding in their life goals doesn't mean that they objectively win life in the same way that you win a football game. It might make them happy, it might make others around them happy and proud of them, but they don't win like you do in a football game. They may win by their own subjective standards, but not objective standards of the universe. Maybe it would be upsetting to you if you weren't created from birth with some specific purpose in mind given to you from God, but the way I see it is that no one has any objective purpose in life, and you either find subjective purposes to fulfill that you personally care about as you go through your life, that you work towards fulfilling for the happiness of yourself or others around you or whatever, or you don't. And many people find their own subjective purposes that they try to fulfill, but again, if they manage to fulfill them, they don't win like you do in a football game, and until it can be proven that God exists, I don't see any reason to assume that those purposes people find for themselves are handed out by some being transcending time and space. And I'm perfectly fine with that. I can live my life happily, fulfilling purposes that I decide are important to me. I don't think that they're important to the universe or some being like God, but I don't need that to be happy. And to be clear, whether I'm happy or not doesn't mean what I'm saying is true. But until God can be proven, or at least some non-circumstantial evidence exists for him, I don't see any point of seeing it any other way.
And even Richard Dawkins admits this. He famously said that in a universe of blind physical forces, there is no justice, there is no good, there is no evil. Things just happen, and bad things happen. And he goes on to say, I'm obviously paraphrasing, I don't have it memorized, but he says, we just dance to our DNA. We're just molecular machines. In other words, we're just moist robots. If we're just moist robots, then murdering someone, first of all, we didn't make the free choice to do that. We were just compelled by physics or evolution to do that. Mm-hmm. Or loving them, same thing. It's just what is. It's not an ought. You can't get this ought from biology. You only get an is. This is what happens. How do we have moral obligations if there is no, first of all, is no moral standard and is no authority to say you ought to behave this way? You don't get moral obligations. You might get moral sentiments. You might get, I have this idea that love is better than murder, but you're not obligated to obey love is better than murder if there is no objective moral standard, and there is no good beyond us, and there is no authority beyond us. It's just your opinion.
To begin with, evolution and physics don't compel us to make certain decisions outside of the fact that the things we decide to do are constrained by what we can physically do in our environments due to our physical and mental features and the fact that we can't bend the laws of physics. For example, I can't decide to jump 100 feet in the air because my legs aren't strong enough and gravity pulls me to the earth. Evolution describes a process by which organisms change genetically generation to generation, and the laws of physics simply govern the behavior of matter and energy in the universe, not what humans decide is and isn't moral. Whether God is real and we have free will because he gave it to us, or he's not real and our free will comes from the fact that we can use our brains to make decisions, doesn't change the fact that we have some degree of free will, and it is limited by what we can accomplish physically and mentally and within the strength or the constraints of the physical universe. Free will is, of course, a contentious subject because we are not all-powerful beings. There are constraints put on us, like I said, because we don't have unlimited physical and mental capabilities, and there are physical features of the universe, like gravity, that limit us from being able to accomplish literally anything we want. This doesn't change with or without the existence of God. We still have the same amount of free will with the same constraints placed on us by the environment and the limits of our bodies and minds. So if we don't make the free choice to decide whether or not to murder because of evolution and physics, that doesn't change with or without God. If God is real or not, we still have the same physical and mental limitations, and we are still constrained by the laws of physics. If God exists, you aren't suddenly free from these constraints I just talked about. Now, even if Richard Dawkins actually said that, just because he said we are moist robots without God just dancing to our DNA doesn't make it true. Just because our DNA has a great influence on our physical and mental capabilities and how we act, doesn't mean it is as simple as input equals output like programming a robot. Part of our evolution is the fact that each person is genetically different, and we have the ability to think abstractly, and we pull from our knowledge, beliefs, emotions, experiences to make decisions, plans, etc. Every time we think, we have a large library of these facts, emotions, beliefs, and opinions to draw from, and the fact that we have, like I said, emotions, beliefs, and subjective opinions in that mix makes us very different from what we think of as robots. Robots do not have many of the very important characteristics that influence the way that we think, so saying we are just voice robots without God is a gross mischaracterization of how people actually are. These key differences between humans and robots is why that ought is able to exist, because people's, like I said, emotions, opinions, and beliefs gets them to decide what ought to happen and what ought not to happen. There is no standard above humans in this regard, And because of that, it is all subjective. If someone says you ought not to murder, that isn't because it is a rule written into our minds and the universe by God. It is because it is that person's opinion, and they were able to develop this opinion because of their mental capabilities combined with their lived experience. We get moral obligations because of our personal, subjective moral opinions and the opinions of those around us. And to be clear, the only thing holding you to these moral obligations are your personal convictions, the convictions of those around you, and depending on what specific moral issue you're talking about and where you live, the authority of the government. You don't have to obey these obligations, but there are real-world consequences if you don't. And if your moral convictions are different from those of others, which is often the case as morality is subjective, then the consequences you face won't come from your own consciousness, but rather from the people around you and potentially the government. So, you're right, you don't have to obey moral obligations in a world without God. And quite frankly, even if God is real, people still disobey the moral obligations that supposedly come from him all the time. In our world, people disobey moral obligations. Happens all the time. And whether God is real or not, they face consequences for that, whether it's from their own consciousness, their treatment in society, or punishment from the government that they live under. So, once again, morality is a bunch of different people's opinions, and many of them are conflicting. But if enough people feel strongly about a specific issue, or if the people in power feel strongly about a specific issue, they can attempt to create laws to force people to follow certain moral standards. Of course, not everyone agrees on the standard, and laws are broken all the time, but that is just more evidence against the idea of objective morality existing. And the same objective moral standards are in everyone's head. If that were the case, why would there be so much crime, and why would there be so much disagreement on what the laws should be? If God has bestowed his objective morality in the minds of every single person, it must not have a very strong hold considering how much disagreement there is about morality.
By the way, as we know, even Richard Dawkins will admit this, Darwinism, evolution, is completely all about the survival of the fittest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he says, I don't want to live in a Darwinian morality, because it is survival of the fittest. Should we kill the weak so the fittest can survive? That's what Hitler did. In fact, he used evolutionary theory in Mein Kampf to advance Nazism, to advance the murder of the Jews, so he could create the Uber race.
And the disabled, right? I remember reading about in the Nazi regime, they just calculatedly obliterated people with disabilities, the weak members of society as well, from a Darwinian motivation.
They obliterated the Jews, the homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, the disabled, gypsies, because they thought they were inferior stock, so to speak. This is eugenics. This is not people made in the image of God. In fact, how did they get the Nazis to murder all those Jews? They said they were subhuman, right? They dehumanized them. So yeah, there is no God. If there is no God, there's nothing ultimately right or wrong. And if you're going to say that evolution is given your moral sentiments, well, they're just your moral sentiments. Then they're not really binding. They're not obligatory. It's just an opinion that you have. And by the way, if evolution has given us all our moral sentiments, evolution has also given us all of our thoughts as well, including the thought that there is no God, including the thought that morality is just a artifact of evolution. So it's really a self-defeating view at the end of the day, Bren.
Because wouldn't the eugenics that you were talking about actually be moral if the end goal was that the fittest would survive? If that's the definition of what is moral, is the human species becoming stronger and more healthy people going forward in history, then this is something I don't understand. I've never heard like an atheist or evolutionary ethicist answer this particular question. That seems to be actually moral according to that view, if the end goal is fit survival.
Well, what they have to do is smuggle in a standard like human flourishing, which is what Sam Harris does, and we respond to him in the book Stealing from God. They have to smuggle that standard in order to make their system work. But again, if there is no God, not even human flourishing is good. because there is no good. There's no purpose. There's no objective. So human flourishing isn't good either. In fact, if you're going to say human flourishing is the standard, you could also ask which humans, the Nazis or people oppose the Nazis. Again, you have no standard by which to judge that. All humans? Who said? You said? What if Hitler comes along and he says, I want to create the Uber race, and I want to get rid of the homosexuals, and I want to get rid of the gypsies, and I want to get rid of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I want to get rid of the Jews, and I want to get rid of the disabled. I want to do all that. Why is that wrong if there is no God? It's just your opinion. There is no right or wrong if there's no God. And all you can say is, if evolution's true, that first of all, you wouldn't know it's true because the thought that you have that evolution's true was given to you by evolution. Secondly, it's just the way things are. It's not right or wrong, good or bad. It just is what it is. You don't get this ought from this biological process. You only get an ought from an immaterial moral authority who is righteous himself and is the standard of rightness, and said, here's the objective of life. Love one another. Don't murder one another. That's how you get morality. You don't get it from the bottom up. You get it from the top down.
Evolution doesn't give you thoughts. It doesn't give you specific moral sentiments. It isn't a being. It doesn't give you anything in the sense that you're saying it does. As I said, it describes a process where organisms change genetically, generation to generation, and the beings that are able to survive long enough to pass on their genes on to the next generation will influence the changing genetic pool. Because of evolution, our brains developed in the way that allows us to think abstractly and have emotions, beliefs, and opinions. The concept of evolution doesn't govern the specific thoughts and opinions that we have. We have a brain capable of abstract thought and complicated emotions, and we have that as a result of evolution. But all of the thoughts and emotions we experience are a result of stimuli from experiencing life, not directly from the concept of evolution. Now, when you're talking about the idea of survival of the fittest governing morality or Darwinian morality, survival of the fittest doesn't specifically mean that the fittest humans must decide to exterminate the weak. Evolution describing survival of the fittest doesn't mean that everything that is fit to survive is going to choose to kill everything it deems less fit. It means that the beings fit to survive will usually live long enough to pass on their genes because they were able to survive long enough to do so, not because they were deemed strong enough by other beings and allowed to live. This doesn't mean that creatures who aren't very well fit to survive won't ever pass on their genes. It's about the law of averages over many generations that results in genetics better suited for survival being passed on most of the time. There isn't any thought or decision-making happening. It's just saying that if something is fit to survive, it will most likely survive to pass on its genes, and if it isn't fit to survive, it most likely won't survive long enough to pass on its genes. On top of this, having a brain that causes the desire to live and having empathy for others and wanting the people around you to live as well causes humans to work together so as many of us as possible can survive. This isn't a contradiction of what human evolution should be. There is not should or shouldn't be an evolution. It is a concept that describes a process. The capacity for our brains to care about other humans is a feature of evolution. Being capable of empathy is one of the reasons why humans are so fit for survival. Taking care of others around you when they need it and being taken care of by others when you need it and taking care of children until they're able to take care of themselves increases everyone's chance of survival, making the human species very fit to survive because we are a cooperative social species that generally wants to see ourselves and others do well. If we weren't generally cooperative in the way that we are and didn't have empathy for anyone else, we probably would have died out, and if not, we certainly wouldn't be where we are today. Sure, what exactly morality should be is just an opinion that can be debated, and the less directly or obviously harmful a controversial act is, the more debatable it is as to whether it is actually bad or not. But for things like murder, that cause someone to stop living, and most people want themselves and other people to keep living. Most, but not all of us agree that murder is bad because it has very obvious negative consequences based on our desires, and we work together as a species to root out murderers and protect everyone else. Having these moral sentiments allows the majority of us to survive and makes our species very fit for survival. Now, as I explained, evolution doesn't give us the thought of evolution. Like I said, our brain developed as a consequence of evolution, and that allowed us the ability to have abstract thoughts and emotions. And that ability to think abstractly allowed us to develop concepts like the scientific method. Through the scientific method, Darwin observed phenomena in nature to come up with the theory of evolution. And since then, more evidence has been found to back up that theory, such as the discovery of genetics and learning how genotypes change and affect the phenotypes of organisms. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of evolution and genetics here. There's plenty of other info on the internet to explain it better than I can. But the point is, evolution didn't put the thought of evolution in our heads. We discovered how it worked through the scientific method, which also wasn't put into our heads by evolution, and we were able to develop the concepts because of the way our brain works. I guess you could say that evolution is indirectly responsible for us developing these concepts because our brains developed the way that they did as a consequence of evolution. But evolution didn't directly put these concepts in our head. But if you want to make the argument that because evolution puts the concept of evolution in our heads, which of course is not true, makes thinking that evolution is how we developed is a self-defeating view, then the same argument could be made that about the belief in God. Because God put the idea of God and objective morality in our heads, so believing in God is a self-defeating view. But of course I would never make this argument because it makes no sense. Even if atheists who acknowledge evolution said that evolution put the idea of evolution inside our heads, which of course is an argument no one is making, how does it follow then that it is a self-defeating view? If evolution did put the idea of evolution in our heads, why would that therefore follow that it isn't true? That makes zero sense. Now, Brandon proposes that given the view that morality resulted from evolution and evolution describes a process that results in survival of the fittest, wouldn't that mean that eugenics and killing the humans that some humans deem as unfit for survival is actually the standard for morality? No, we don't get our morality from the concept of evolution. The brain that we have resulting from evolution allows us to think abstractly, have emotions, opinions, the ability to feel empathy, etc., etc. And our empathy and desire for ourselves and other humans to continue living is why most humans view killing as immoral. People with the view that there is no God and morality is an indirect result of evolution aren't saying that the concepts of evolution is the standard for morality. We aren't saying that survival of the fittest is what is moral and therefore we should kill who we deem unfit for survival. We are saying that because of the way our brains evolved, we have certain desires and mental capabilities like staying alive and the ability to have empathy along with everything else I've said like 10 times now. And because our brain works in the way that it does, we are able to develop a sense of morality, not that the concept of evolution tells us what is and isn't moral. Sam Harris's idea of human flourishing is his subjective standard for his morality. No one is saying that it is the definitive objective morality. It is the standard he uses to decide what he thinks is right and wrong. It wasn't smuggled in as a stipulation for how evolutionary morality works. His brain has emotions, empathy, and the capacity for abstract thought and all that stuff as a result of evolution. And he used these abilities that almost all humans have to come up with a subjective standard that he personally uses to decide what he thinks is right and wrong. The objective that you say doesn't exist is only true in the sense that there isn't some cosmic objective for human morality. His personal objective is human flourishing because he personally thinks that would be good based on his empathy and desires, not because it is written into the universe that human flourishing is the objective of morality. You could ask the question, who's flourishing? And depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers because it is subjective. Now, if Hitler comes along and says, I want to create the Uber race and get rid of all these people, and he gets enough people to agree with him and help him, then we get what actually happened in reality, which is a big war where Hitler and his cronies attempt to further their goals, and the people opposed to his goals try and stop him. Once again, morality is subjective, which is why it was even able to happen in the first place. Although, to be clear, there was a lot more than differences in morality that led up to World War II. But that isn't what we're here to discuss. The point is that Hitler can decide that creating the Uber race aligns with his morality, and people who have different subjective moralities than Hitler can disagree with that and choose to stop him from reaching his goals, which is exactly what happened in reality. Yes, it is just people's opinions. If objective morality was real and already in everyone's heads bestowed upon them from God, then why would World War II have even happened in the first place? Once again, you get the ought from people's opinions. That's why there are so many conflicting oughts, because once again, objective morality is a myth.
So your football analogy reminds me a little bit of C.S. Lewis's idea of the measuring stick. He says you have to have an idea of straight in order to know what crooked is. It's that idea of a transcendent thing, or in your analogy, the rules of the game, not just how are we playing it. You can't change that all of the time. There has to actually be an agreed upon, embedded, baked in understanding of how does this game work? What are the rules of engagement? How does the world work? And the idea that we can understand when something is wrong itself reveals that there is something outside of just your opinion versus my opinion.
That's right. Yeah, there's always a standard you're appealing to. In fact, Lewis says in Mere Christianity, if you're going to say that one set of ideas is better than another set of ideas, for example, if you're going to say, and he wrote this during World War II, if you're going to say the Nazi ideas are better than, or the Allied ideas are better than the Nazi ideas, you're implying there's a standard beyond both the Nazis and the Allies to which you're comparing both sets of ideas, right? There's got to be a standard to outside of, say, America and Germany to say, well, America's closer to the truth than Germany was in World War II. What is that standard? That standard has to be outside of both countries. That standard is God's nature. And Lewis also gave the illustration of boats where he said, we might agree that it's better if, there's certain rules of the road when we're out there in the sea, you don't cut me off in a certain way. I won't cut you off, that kind of thing. But you really got to figure out, why are the boats out there to begin with? I mean, what's the purpose of boating? Where are you going? What are you doing? And without that overall purpose, there's no objective way of saying this is the right way to boat and this is the wrong way to boat, right? There's got to be an overall purpose, and that overall purpose in life, according to Christianity, is to know God and to make him known, to love God and love one another. And when you do that, you'll know God and you'll make him known.
In my view, the measuring stick in C.S. Lewis's analogy is your own subjective personal values. Of course, those personal values aren't objectively better than someone else's. They come from what you care about based on your personal experiences. If you don't care about something that someone else does, then that might cause you to have a different opinion on morality than said other person. I can't stress enough that there is no definitive measuring stick that governs every single person's morality. And once again, that is why there are so many different opinions on morality. When we feel like we understand something is wrong itself, that doesn't reveal there is something outside of your opinion versus my opinion. Your opinion versus my opinion is literally all that it is. If you disagree, then you need to argue why it follows that there actually is something beyond that besides you know that it's wrong. Because other people might feel that they know that it is right, or at least they know that it isn't wrong. How do you reconcile all of these differences in opinion about morality with the idea that there is an objective morality bestowed by God in everyone? Once again, some people might say premarital sex is morally wrong because of God's objective morality. I say that it isn't. How do you get the idea that there is some measuring stick other than our own personal values beyond us when we disagree on that? When I say that the Allied ideas of not exterminating people are better than the Nazi ideas of exterminating people, I am implying that exterminating people goes against my personal values because I personally value human life, not because God has put the idea in my head that it's wrong. I am not saying that exterminating people is objectively wrong as a rule written into the universe. I am saying that I think it's wrong because I value human life and I want people to be able to live out their lives because I like living and I want to be able to live out my life. And because of the empathy that my brain is capable of, that leads me to want others to have the same opportunity that I want to have. So the Allied values during World War II is closer to my personal values than Germany's values during World War II. That is what I'm saying. If you were to ask a Nazi the same question, then they would say that Germany's values during World War II aligns better with their personal values, that we should exterminate people who they deem unworthy of living. And this can happen because morality is not, there's no objective standard bestowed by God in everyone's head. How could you possibly look at World War II and come away thinking that objective morality exists? Moving on to your boat analogy, there is no objective purpose to boating and no objectively wrong way to boat. People have different subjective reasons to boat and different subjective opinions about the right and wrong way to boat. This analogy does not help illustrate the concept of objective morality. If anything, it helps illustrate the concept of subjective morality because all of those reasons for boating and right and wrong ways of boating are subjective. So, after watching this video, I still don't believe in objective morality. It didn't demonstrate that objective morality is real, and it definitely did not live up to the title of proving God with objective morality. It didn't even prove objective morality was real, so it fell quite short of the title. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and let me know if you think I'm wrong. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.